It's remarkable how easily the mind can be tricked by what it sees. We live in a time where everyone has the power to publish their own highlight reel. Every victory gets posted, every polished moment gets displayed for the world to admire. And if you stare at that curated stream of perfection for long enough, a dangerous belief begins to take root. You start to believe that progress only counts when it is visible. You begin to think that if a thing cannot be shown, it must not be real. This is where the real trouble begins. The mind quietly starts treating attention like proof. If people clap, it must be working. If people react, it must be valuable. And without realizing it, a person can shift from working for a result to working for a reaction. They begin to choose what looks impressive over what builds true strength. They start to measure a day by whether it produced something showy instead of whether it produced genuine growth. But presentation and production are not the same thing. One can be staged with smoke and mirrors, while the other must be built with sweat and substance. When you confuse the two, you create a scoreboard that rewards noise over depth, and you set yourself up for a fall.
The public record is never the full record. No one broadcasts their inner doubts or their moments of insecurity. No one posts their awkward first attempts, the rough drafts, or the failed experiments. No one makes announcements about the long, uneventful evenings spent in repetition, correction, and slow, painstaking improvement. What you see is the polished result, the best angle, the finished product, the single moment that makes them look competent. If you watch that all day, every day, you will begin to believe that everyone else is moving faster and living better than you. You will start to think that you are the only one struggling, the only one sweating, and that is precisely how the comparison trap is built. You compare your ordinary Tuesday to someone else's best 5 minutes. You compare your practice to someone else's announcement. You compare your early stage to someone else's later stage. Then you look in the mirror and call yourself behind. Not because you are actually behind, but because you chose the wrong metric for comparison. You are judging your behind-the-scenes reality against someone else's highly produced highlight reel.
That wrong comparison carries a heavy hidden cost. It creates shame where there should be patience. It creates panic where there should be planning. It makes you believe that a slow stage means something is fundamentally wrong, when in reality, the slow stage is often the very stage that makes everything else possible. People quit too early, not because the work failed, but because their expectations were distorted by what they kept watching. They started to believe that if they weren't getting noticed, they were wasting their time, and that belief can quietly ruin a life. The hours that make you truly valuable are usually the hours nobody applauds, the hours spent reading, practicing, learning, repeating, fixing mistakes, and doing the small things right. From the outside, it looks ordinary, mundane, even boring, but ordinary is where the miracle is built. The foundation of any impressive structure is buried deep underground, unseen and uncelebrated. If you stay in that quiet place long enough, doing the work, something solid and unshakable begins to form beneath the surface.
The real danger begins when approval starts to feel like oxygen. If you train yourself to chase it, you will become dependent on it. You will need someone else to confirm that your effort matters. And that is an incredibly dangerous position to be in, because the outside world is fundamentally inconsistent. Praise comes and goes like the wind. Attention shifts to the next shiny thing. The crowd inevitably moves on. If your motivation is tied to the crowd, your discipline will rise and fall with their fickle mood. And once that happens, your sense of time begins to warp. The calendar stops being a helpful tool for planning and starts becoming a harsh judge. You feel immense pressure to make something dramatic happen and to make it happen quickly. You want a big leap in a tight window. You want a clean, simple story that fits neatly into a single year. But a life is not built on arbitrary deadlines. It is built on consistent habits. When you get trapped in these short windows, you start forcing the wrong kind of progress.
You try to compress learning into a quick burst so you can show a result. You skip steps because steps look slow. You avoid repetition because repetition looks boring. You want the end without earning the middle. But that kind of progress is fragile. You build speed without building skill, and fragile progress will eventually collapse under pressure. Some people are not behind. They're simply in the part of the process that cannot be rushed. They're building foundations. They're developing capacity. But to someone who only watches finished products, it looks like nothing is happening. So you must be incredibly careful about what you choose to stare at. What you watch becomes your standard, and your standard becomes your source of stress. If your standard is built on constant public displays, even your good days will feel small and insignificant. You can be genuinely improving and still feel like you are losing, simply because someone else made a louder announcement. That is not a life problem. That is a scoring problem. You are keeping score on the wrong board. So, the first and most essential correction is simple but profound. Fix the scoreboard. You must learn to separate performance from progress. Performance is what you show to the world. Progress is what you actually become. Performance can be staged and rehearsed. Progress cannot be faked for very long. Performance can be fast and dramatic. Progress usually has a much slower, steadier rhythm because it includes discipline, correction, and genuine learning. If you do not separate these two things, you will begin to resent the very process that is making you better. When you look closely at people who build real, lasting results, you will see that they move through that slower rhythm. They spend long stretches doing unglamorous work. They keep promises to themselves. They practice the basics when no one is watching. They fix small errors before they become big problems. They build skills that are useful even when no one notices. Then, one day, something shows up publicly, and it looks sudden to everyone else, but it was not sudden at all to the person who did the work.
Speed is a misleading judge. Fast results get all the celebration, while slow results get questioned. But quick wins without underlying structure often become future problems. A person can get a little success and then be completely crushed by it because they did not build the internal discipline to handle it. So you must decide what kind of winning you are actually after. You do not need to win the approval contest. You need to win the character contest, the skill contest, the consistency contest. These are the quiet contests, and the prize is a life that actually works. A life that works is infinitely better than a life that merely looks good in a snapshot. When you choose the quiet contests, you begin to see how much of the noise in the world is just insecurity in disguise. Some people constantly collect public proof that they're doing well. They feel uneasy if they cannot point to something visible. That anxiety becomes a leash, pulling them toward what is easy to display instead of what is hard to build.
Serious people have a different relationship with privacy. They do not need to advertise every step. They understand that the workshop is not a stage. The point is not secrecy for its own sake. It is independence. Independence means you do not depend on being seen in order to keep going. You do not mistake attention for achievement. You do not let someone else's pace define your own. Because once the outside world sets your pace, it will eventually start setting your choices. You will choose shortcuts. You will skip preparation. You will try to look ready instead of becoming ready. And when real pressure arrives, weakness will show up, not because you lacked potential, but because you traded steady building for quick presentation. So you must return to a simple grounding principle. Your life is built in private before it can be lived in public. Your discipline is developed in unseen hours. Your confidence is built by keeping small promises to yourself. Your capability is formed by repetition and steady effort. None of that needs applause to be real.
Serious people have a different relationship with privacy. They do not need to advertise every step. They understand that the workshop is not a stage. The point is not secrecy for its own sake, it is independence. Independence means you do not depend on being seen in order to keep going. You do not mistake attention for achievement. You do not let someone else's pace define your own. Because once the outside world sets your pace, it will eventually start setting your choices. You will choose shortcuts. You will skip preparation. You will try to look ready instead of becoming ready. And when real pressure arrives, weakness will show up, not because you lacked potential, but because you traded steady building for quick presentation. So you must return to a simple grounding principle. Your life is built in private before it can be lived in public. Your discipline is developed in unseen hours. Your confidence is built by keeping small promises to yourself. Your capability is formed by repetition and steady effort. None of that needs applause to be real. People who keep their eyes on the crowd get distracted from the work. People who keep their eyes on the work eventually earn their results. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is what they choose to measure. Stop measuring what is loud. Start measuring what lasts. Measure your consistency. Measure your follow-through. Measure your learning. Measure the quality of your habits. Measure your ability to do the right thing when it is not exciting. Because the visible world has a way of making healthy growth look like failure. It can make the slow stage feel embarrassing. It can make the basic stage feel small. But if you stop chasing the public scoreboard and return to the real work, you will discover something powerful. Most of the growth that changes your life happens quietly. And if you stay long enough in that quiet place, doing the work, the invisible will eventually become visible. You must understand why so many people misread what is happening in their lives. They judge progress by what can be pointed at.
They want a visible change, a public marker, a clear moment they can show someone and say, "Look, now I'm improving." And when they cannot point to something obvious, they assume nothing is happening. That assumption has ended more dreams than failure ever did, because it convinces a person to quit during the very season when the roots are spreading deep. Some of the most important progress you will ever make will happen in ways that cannot be seen right away. Strength is not only what you can display, strength is what you can handle. Strength is what you can carry without breaking. Strength is what you can endure without panicking. Strength is what stays intact when pressure rises. That kind of strength is not built in the spotlight. It is built in routine. It is built in the long stretch where you wake up and do the work again, even though today looks the same as yesterday. So stay with the process. Keep building your character until your character becomes your advantage. Because the long game is the only game worth winning. And the person who can play the long game without losing patience is the person who builds something that lasts.